Hello, and welcome to this briefing on how college and university endowments work. My name is Liz Clark, and I'm Director of Federal Affairs at the National Association of College and University Business Officers. First, a little bit about NACUBO. NACUBO is a membership organization representing more than 2,100 colleges and universities across the country and around the world. We primarily work with the chief business officers at those colleges and universities. These business officers are the chief architects of budgets at those colleges and universities, building budgets to meet the educational, research, and public service needs of those institutions. NACUBO also sponsors an annual study of college and university endowments. It's the largest and longest-running survey on higher education endowments in North America. NACUBO has sponsored an endowment survey with various partners every year since 1974. Today, my goal is to answer 5 questions about college and university endowments. First, how are endowments designed to work? How much do institutions rely on endowments? How do trustees determine the appropriate amount of spending? How does donor intent restrict spending? And how does endowment spending support student financial aid? Much of our information is based on the data that we collect and the information we glean in the process of collecting information for the NACUBO Common Fund study of endowments. The most latest study, 2014, is based on a survey of 832 colleges and universities. So first, how do college and university endowments work? An endowment is a collection of funds provided by donors to secure long-term institutional strategic goals. They often have hundreds or even thousands of individual funds that comprise these endowments that range in size from below $10,000 to over $1 million. Most of these individual funds have a specific donor-directed purpose. That is, the donor directed those funds to be used for student aid, for research, possibly for public service, possibly for libraries or other missions that are a part of the institution. These funds represent the institution's promise to those donors to use investment and income gains generated by their gifts to support an aspect of a university's mission, usually in perpetuity. Colleges rely on these funds and seek low volatility over time in the income that they generate. Colleges and universities are seeking a steady and reliable source of funding to help with their institutional planning and long-term budgeting needs. So 3 words to remember as we discuss college and university endowments are perpetual, growing, and consistent. So once again, college and university endowments are based on these individual funds, and those funds were often stipulated, their use was stipulated through legally binding agreements. Those agreements will stipulate the purpose of the fund, they will acknowledge the source of the fund, and they will also define the duration of the fund. Many donors seek to enable their gift to last into perpetuity. An endowment is not designed to be a rainy day, emergency, or reserve fund. It is not a set of funds that can be easily transferred to be used for other purposes without the expressed consent of the donors or their heirs. These funds are expected to provide stable funding to the college or university while creating a balance between the needs of today's students and students in the future. Colleges and universities are also held to state law when it comes to managing these endowment funds. The Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, UPMIFA, provides the guidelines both on how colleges and universities should be investing these funds, as well as how these funds should be withdrawn and spent. UPMIFA has been adopted in 49 states. So, what do endowments support? They can and do support student financial aid. They also can support efforts to enable student retention and success, completion. These endowment funds can support research endeavors, public service missions. They could be supporting faculty salaries through faculty chairs or professorships. Not all institutions are solely undergraduate educational institutions. Many of them also have major research missions as well as major public service missions. Land-grant universities make a great example, and their responsibility to promoting the work and the research that they do through the Cooperative Extension Service. And sometimes endowment funds help support those programs as well. It's important to understand that endowment funds available to cover other budget areas at a college and university enable institution to keep tuition pressure down. That is, if endowment spending supports a faculty position, it is funding that the university didn't have to seek elsewhere as it put together its annual budget for the year. So, to meet donor obligations, investment managers must strive to achieve generational equity. That is, they must make investment decisions that help provide that steady and reliable flow of revenue to colleges and universities today, as well as to work to ensure that those funds are available over the long term. To meet this goal, investment managers strive to achieve a long-term return of approximately 8%. Most managers look at the 10-year average annual return to gauge that measure. Well, why do they seek 8%? By and large, most colleges and universities seek to withdraw between 4 and 5% for current spending needs. They seek about 1 to 1.5% to go toward expenses and fees, and about 2 to 3% for reinvestment and to keep pace with inflation. At NACUBO, based on our study, we have found that most colleges and universities are not quite meeting that 8% goal. In our last report, we found that the average annual return over the past 10 years was 7.1%. As you can see from the chart, some institutions can and do meet their goals of 8% or more, but by and large, we have found that colleges and universities' returns are slightly below 8%. We look at long-term returns to average out volatility that you see in the stock market and other areas where investments have been made. So how much do colleges and universities actually rely on endowments? In 2014, of the 832 colleges and universities we surveyed, we found that altogether they withdrew $21.2 billion from their endowments. And we found that the average withdrawal accounted for about 9% of the college and university operating budget. Other operating revenues come from tuition and fees, state appropriations, grants and contracts, and other revenue streams to the institution. Well, what are those funds used for? Again, student aid, faculty salaries, research, public service, libraries, campus museums. Endowments cover a wide variety of activities at colleges and universities. We've also found that the largest endowments are supporting the largest percentage of their operating budgets. The schools with the largest endowments are getting more revenue for their operating budgets from their endowment withdrawals. So here's an example. It's a few years old, but it's still a good example. This came from a 2012 webcast that we did at NACUBO based on FY 2011 at Catholic University. You can see that Catholic University used a spending policy of 5%. That is, they took a 5% payout from their endowment, and that payout wound up being about 4.3%, just 4.3% of their overall operating revenue budget at the university. You can see that other revenue to the university came from tuition and fees, sales and services of other auxiliary enterprises, grants and contracts, other contributions, and some other operating revenues. So how do trustees determine what's appropriate? How do they decide the appropriate amount of spending? By and large, this is a decision of college and university boards of trustees. Typically, there's a finance committee and/or an investment subcommittee, as you'll see here in this example. Sometimes they receive advice from outside consultants. Sometimes the institution has their own investment officers that help come to the decisions that the board needs to make about their endowment payout year by year. Those trustees and those investment officers are guided by the rules set out in UPMIFA. I mentioned earlier that we have these state laws that guide both investment practices as well as payout practices. So these laws often point to the criteria in this common law. They seek to preserve the endowment fund, seek to ensure that the spending is only for the purposes of the institution. They seek to make sure that the institution is responding to general economic conditions and that they are following the investment policies of the institutions. In fact, in passing the UPMIFA laws, 11 states have included a provision that declares a spending rate of more than 7% presumptively imprudent. Let's take a look at spending rates. By and large, you will see that college and university endowment spending rates are at about between 4 and 5%. The effective spending rate is the share of the endowment value withdrawn for spending on financial aid, research, public service, or other purposes supporting and fulfilling the mission of the institution. We found that about 26% of the largest endowments that we surveyed spend 5% or more. One other way to think about spending rates is to think about the advice that's often given to individuals as they consider drawing down on their retirement accounts. Many people now have 401k or 403b type retirement accounts, and you often read in the popular financial advice trade that retirement advisors recommend, once you retire, withdrawing down from your retirement account somewhere between 3 and 5%. This is so that you are insured a steady stream of income over the 20 to 30 years of your retirement. Endowments aren't expected to last 20 or 30 years, however. Endowments are expected to last into perpetuity. One thing we'd like to point out here at NACUBO is that while on average we have found that spending rates declined slightly, we found that endowment dollar spending is up. That is, the formula is working in a way that endowments are growing, and even though the spending rate may be slightly lower, the payout in terms of dollars is going up. On average, we found that over the years between 2004 and 2014, that the average endowment increased from $360.6 million to $620.2 million, and that the average spending from endowment nearly doubled, going from $11.4 million to $26.3 million between the years of 2004 and 2014. So how does donor intent restrict spending? Let's discuss this issue a bit further. Most endowment spending dollars are indeed restricted, and these spending restrictions come from donors' wishes. These schools must stay obligated to the goals and desires of those contracts that were set out by donors when they left or donated money to the institution. This type of giving is a way to leverage private investment in American colleges and universities, as well as across the charitable sector. Last year, our endowment study found that most endowment gifts are restricted. Of $7.7 billion in new financial contributions to endowments, 90% of these gifts were restricted to a specific purpose. But, as my next slide points out, not all gifts to colleges and universities are restricted to their endowments. According to the Voluntary Support of Education survey conducted by the Council for Aid to Education, approximately 28% of gifts to colleges and universities went to endowments. Most other gifts to colleges and universities went to current year operations, about 57%. 50% of that was restricted, 7% unrestricted, but 57% went to current year operations, while 28% was directed to endowments. Let's take a little bit of a look at endowment spending on student financial aid. How much aid is going to students and their financial needs? According to the same 2014 Voluntary Support of Education study by the Council for Aid to Education, about 43% of the gifts directed to endowments went to student aid. You can see from this chart that other gifts went to faculty and staff compensation, to research programs, public service and extension, and other areas and aspects of management of the college and university. Another point to make, again, to stress, is that spending not directed to student aid keeps down pressure on increasing student tuition and fees. That is, it frees up dollars that wouldn't otherwise have to be directed to that area. NACUBO also conducts an annual tuition discounting study. From this study, we looked at the number of institutions with endowments greater than $1 billion to see how much aid they were putting towards student need. And what we found was that institutions with endowments greater than $1 billion used more grant dollars to meet student needs than those schools with endowments below $25 million. With that, that is my quick summary of how colleges and universities' endowments work, with a little bit of explanation as to what goes towards student aid from college and university endowments. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact NACUBO. Thank you.